everyone. I'm Superfizz from the EthStaker community, and this is probably our first formal fancy call of 2022. I'm really excited to have the gang together today. We're going to heckle Mr. Mojo. We're going to help Mr. Mojo as he's our intern, and we have tasked him with shopping for hardware to set up a validator. And so I know that's a big question on everyone's mind when you start as a validator. Lamboshi, or Nolan as he's here, has done a bunch of great hardware guides, and he's generally considered the hardware guru. We also have Unvetica with us. Hey, Michael. We have our new EthStakers, Thorsten and Remy, who both have a wealth of knowledge in setting this stuff up and knowing what's a good hardware configuration. And Sam is hanging out with us, kind of half working on something else and half here to help us be on task. So glad to have everyone today.
For sure.
So, Mr. Mojo, do I call you Mr. Mojo on
You can call me Mojo if you want to.
Mojo?
A lot of people just call me Mojo.
Mojo. I can do that because Mr.'s a little long. We both have name modifiers. You have a name modifier and I have a name modifier. Yep. So Mojo, I was like, I almost was going to say your real name because that's how I know you best. And for the record, I also got a new camera set up. I don't know how well it's going to work. If it doesn't work, I'm going to text Jeremiah and say, Jets JT Nickel from EthStaker, say, hey dude, what's going on with my camera? Mojo.
Fizz.
What do you know about staking on Ethereum?
I know a lot of the here, take my Ethereum and stake it for me services. But I personally am not interested in that. I really want to run my own thing. I think it's way cooler if I'm in control of my Ethereum staking than just trusting someone else to do it for me. So this is like the first step in going towards that.
Awesome. And so we obviously, for this far, we know that in order to host a node, there are two general options. The gold standard for node operations is solo staking on the Ethereum network with one of the four validator clients. Those are Lighthouse, Nimbus, Teku, and Prism. We also know that right now we have huge concerns about client diversity, and we recognize that running Prism is not healthy for the network. Even though the Prism is a fine client, 68% of the clients run it, and we need to scale back from there. So that's solo. The other way that EthStaker promotes, I hate promotes, it sounds like marketing. The other way that we support all the ways. Help me get the right word here. Yeah, we promote Rocket Pool. The Rocket Pool requires you to have 16 Ether and 1.6 RPL in 1.6 ETH in RPL, and then you can also be a solo node operator. Which option are we going with here today?
I'm unsure.
Okay.
Being honest with you, I kind of wanted to get some information on how the hardware works, what every part means for it, and then kind of go from there, I think.
So the good news is, I'll give Nolan a chance. Nolan, what's the difference in hardware requirements between running a node on Rocket Pool and running a gold standard solo node?
That was one of my questions, actually.
As near as makes no difference, 0.
Yeah, so exactly the same hardware. And if, as a matter of fact, if you run on Rocket Pool, you're still staking as a solo operator. You're just using Ether that come from some other people. So cool. I think we don't actually have to get to that question today, do we? Because we're really just focusing on buying hardware.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I have some hardware-related questions I would like to ask throughout as well when we're going through. So
go for it. Hey, why don't you start with your first question, and I will shut up and let some of the smart people answer.
Sure. So one of the first things that I want to ask is, people told me that if I wanted to run a solo validator, I need to have what's called a NUC or an NUC. Not sure how to properly say that out loud yet. But what is that, and why would I use that as opposed to, say, my regular computer?
Good question. Who wants to take that? Not everybody at once. So I have a biased take on that. The NUC is a convenience. It's a small form factor PC, really compact, right? Intel and AMD make them. I think on AMD it's not actually AMD, it's ASUS, but same difference. They usually run a little hotter because they're tiny. They typically are meant for like this kind of lightweight operation. You typically find like 4 and 6 core CPUs in there. You find memory that does not tell you when it breaks, and it's not really built for remote operation. So it's not home server gear. It's a small mini PC. Think like a Mac Mini, but in the PC world.
Okay. So basically, it's like a little mini computer that allows me to do specific things easier as opposed to like a wide range of things like a regular computer would.
It will allow you to do all the things a regular computer does, minus maybe putting a mega NVIDIA card in there and playing whatever the kids play these days. So okay. in that way, it's a real computer, but you don't have to put it together, right? The amount of Lego you do is reduced. Maybe you put some RAM and an SSD in, but that's it, right?
Right. So essentially, are these like already pre-built, or do you have to build them yourself, or can you do one or the other?
Two options really. One is you buy what's known as a bare bones NUC. It comes with the motherboard, the case, the power supply is usually built in, the CPU, everything in one, and then you slot in some RAM and you put in whatever storage you want, whatever SSD you want, right? And then you're done. So a tiny amount of adult Lego. The other option is to buy it ready-made. The RAM and the SSD is already in, and off you go.
Okay, cool. So you talk about RAM and SSD a lot, so I'm assuming those would be very important for something like this.
Oh, you need them. You need to run your programs in something, right? There's I'm not sure, that's a NUC, right? So they're tiny, right? They're nice and tiny. That's a real advantage. They're usually also really small. They can get a little hot, but you can get around that by fiddling with their settings a little. So go ahead.
I love these. I actually have 4 of them that I repurpose frequently. So I will just wipe them, and I do a lot of testing with them. I could use virtual machines, but sometimes I want to leave one of these running for a year. And other than my staking hardware, nothing I have runs continuously. But these, I can always... it's just a great little piece of, I would call it a piece of kit. Very convenient.
So we've seen some failure modes, right? So you asked about RAM and SSD. We've seen some failure modes with these NUCs. Let's start with the RAM. It's just your usual PC RAM. So it's not server RAM. It will not shout at you if it fails, right? Which means that if it fails, testing that gets really cumbersome. You're talking about a week of banging on the thing to figure it out, right? So my recommendation there is get the most boring stick of RAM you can, right? If it says Samsung or Crucial on it and it's not overclocked and it doesn't have any RGBs, perfect. That's what you want, right? For the SSDs, most everything works. We've seen some issues with ones that run very hot because these NUCs are so small. So if they get to 50 C, 60 C Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, they start really slowing down and they might not be able to keep up. And then the other thing is like the ultra budget stuff like PNY, whatever, QLC DRAM less, $100 for 2 terabytes. That stuff might not keep up. But if it's a reasonable mainstream brand and, if you Googled it a little and you found, okay, it's not going to melt on me, it's going to work just fine in there.
I want to point out something you said, if something in this fails, if the motherboard fails, if the RAM fails, your staking hardware is generally, for lack of a better word, disposable. Now, you want it to run for a long time. You want it to run for a couple of years, but a lot of people put their heart and soul into their staking setup, and they're terrified for anything to go wrong with it. And kind of the thing people need to understand is your validator node is really just something that uses your keys to do a job. And as long as you have your keys, you can always be down for a couple hours, a couple days, a week to put up a new system and keep it going. So redundancy is great. Overkill hardware is fine if that's what you want to do. But it's important to think about these as disposable validating tools that you can easily rebuild and keep going if you need to.
Going back to the hardware talk specifically in relation to the hard drive, York, is there a reason why I would choose an SSD over a spinning platter?
Why you ask that in such a way as if you know there is. So good question, particularly in a NUC where I have to choose one or the other, right? The clients we're using, the execution client, like a Geth or a Besu or whatever it might be, the consensus client to a lesser degree, like the Lighthouse, the Tecos of the world, they have a copy of the database of the chain on the drive, usually not a complete copy, but a fairly large copy. So you're talking 600 gig or so of data that's sloshing around there. And they're constantly reading and writing this because what is known as the blockchain state changes all the time. People send stuff around. So you may need to make changes to the database. All of which says, if this was a hard drive, it would have to, what's known as seek, move the head around 200 to 300 times per second. And it literally cannot do that. It can't. Hard drives top out as what's known as about 100 IOs per second. SSDs can do thousands because there's no spinning parts, no head needs to be moved, right? So they're a lot faster with seek times, and that's why we're using SSDs, because they're the database behind that reads and writes tiny amounts of data, hundreds of times a second, and the hard drives can't keep up.
We actually have another tier. We have spinning platters, we have SSD, and then we have NVMe.
Which is an SSD.
Yes, it's an SSD interface, right? But is there because NVMe it's like 5x faster, is there any difference for a home validator whether they choose a 2.5-inch IDE SSD or a NVMe SSD?
Probably not. You're just talking about, really with NVMe and the SATA, you're talking about interfaces. The drives behind them, an NVMe drive can get a lot faster. So I've got one that can sync Geth in like 5 hours, for example, right? Where my SATA takes 12 hours. Well, how often do I sync Geth? That doesn't matter really, you know? And then the other truth as well is you can have SATA SSDs that are faster than NVMe SSDs because what's in there also matters. It's not just how fast can the bus move the data, it's also how fast can the SSD itself handle the data. And in the end, the same thing is in there. There's a controller, there's some flash. There might be, hopefully, some RAM as a cache, right? But if there isn't, it gets slower. The more bits you cram into that flash at the same time, this is where things like tri-layer and quad layer come in. The more bits you cram in, the slower the whole thing gets. So yeah, long story short, no, either one is fine. Just get a reputable brand and you're good.
Kind of touching on what Fizz was talking about before, you can get, you can be as complex or simple with these setups as you can. You can have redundant power supplies and all the bells and whistles. But something I want to touch on specifically with the NUCs is, we touted them as basically laptop hardware, low power, like low consuming power. And I want to address this specifically because we get a lot of these questions with the EthStakers, especially for new solo stakers, is that going to be enough? Not just today, but going forward, 2+5 years from now? Is it something where I'm going to eventually, it won't be powerful enough, or whatever the causes may be? What does that look like?
We do a magic 8-ball screen share right quick. You got one of those? Go shake it. Tell me what it says.
It says most likely. I don't think I
Okay,
can spell it.
great. I love it. That's the right answer. Most likely. Yes, that is exactly the right answer. So we expect that current requirements will not greatly increase. We expect this one from a technological perspective, but also because we know what all core devs in the Ethereum Foundation, so the people behind Ethereum, what they're thinking. And what they're thinking is, we are not Solana. We do not want 500, 1,000, or whatever it is validators. We want hundreds of thousands. And that means it needs to run on consumer equipment, and it needs to keep running on consumer equipment. And there's all kinds of technical things that are already being thought about, such as, reducing the amount of data we're actually holding, and making sure that computation isn't too complex locally. And in the end, that's the whole ethos of Ethereum, that anybody can run a node. So I expect that will continue, and the NUC you buy today will still validate happily 5 years from now.
Awesome. Yep. I love hearing that, and I love jamming that home. You don't need a supercharged, double redundant power supply, water cooled gaming rig. We can totally do this on the NUC comfortably.
It is, however, true that you get additional ETH if you have many RGBs on it.
Right. Yep. That's a great shout out.
You gotta have the RGBs.
Incentive rewards. I like those. All right, cool. So there's something that I did want to ask. So how many nodes in our validators am I able to run on one of these things at once?
More than you can afford.
Really?
Unless you are very, very rich, in which case buy a better machine. It's been tested in testnet with 4,000, no problem. There's been a problem at 10,000. The professional staking outfits stop at 1,000 for just blast radius reasons. You don't want one of those machines going down and taking more than 1,000 things down with it. So if you have more than 32,000 ETH, buy a second one, please. Not because you have to, but because, you
because
should.
why not, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Don't forget your friend superfizz.eth.
That's right.
Yes. If you want to help me reach my goal of running 1,000 of those faster, mrmojo.eth, just send it all there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then that means, I guess, for me and everybody else on the planet, for the most part, we're only going to need one, which is great, because that means you just go through, you buy your one, you really don't have to worry about it anymore then.
It's great that we said that. It's actually not only can one machine run 1,000 validators, you should not buy multiple machines to run your validators. So that's point. A lot of people love redundancy, and they say, well, if I'm going to buy one, I might as well buy two, so that if one goes down, I can run the other one. In theory, there's some merit to that. In practice, you should never run your validator keys on two setups. It will lead to a slashing event. It is very serious. It is one of the most important things we have to say to any new validator, any old validator. Never run your keys on two machines under any circumstances. I want to caveat that by unless you know what you're doing. But if you know what you're doing, then you're not listening to me anyway.
But I want to caveat your caveat. Super. So early on in mainnet, this happened. There were people who said, aha, but we're not just superfizz in his basement or wherever he lives. We are smart. We are the best engineers in the industry. We can do this, and we can do it safely. And it was a large staking outfit. And guess what? They got over 100 validators slashed this way. So that's just pure hubris. As an engineer, as somebody smart, understand that you're gonna screw up. So, just run it in one place, and if it's down, bring it back up. That's it.
If you want backup hardware, don't install anything on it. Leave it bare metal, and that way, when your system goes down, you can set it back up. A lot of people are, they want to clone their drives and have one ready to go. It's just dangerous. It's playing with fire. So
This is something that's near and dear to my heart because I come originally from the NAS, the true NAS community, before I got into Ethereum. And those guys build serious home servers. They cost about the same as a NUC. They require a little bit more adult Lego. They do not come pre-assembled. And they have a lot of this kind of redundancy built in, right? So no, the power supply isn't redundant, but how often does that fail? The memory is server memory. So if it fails, it will tell you and it will self-repair. So you can just schedule a swap out. The drives are often mirrored. So if a drive fails, just put another one in, let it re-silver, problem solved. So if you're really, really keen on that, I would go with just a little bit of home server redundancy in one machine rather than running two machines.
There's some merit to that. Nolan and I actually run servers. We run industrial servers at our homes just because we're idiots. I mean,
because it's awesome.
Didn't know.
Not idiots.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's awesome.
When we started this a couple of years before the beacon chain launched, we did not know what the actual hardware requirements were going to be, and we didn't want to be left behind. So Nolan and I connected because we were chatting, and we're like, "Wait, we have the same server. We're both fools." But it's cool. It's all right. One of the things I've run into is our server hardware it's like 8th generation Intel, and it does not run all of the instruction sets required for like Go. So some things like, for example, Prism will not work on servers that are that old without a special compile, which is fine because we don't want you to run Prism right now anyway.
There you go. So, Superfizz, can I ask you a leading question? So if I can build this on this tiny little NUC, right? Can I just do 250 gig of SSD or 500 gig of SSD? Why do I even need a full copy of the chain? Can't I just point it at Infura?
Well, it's like, I think Nolan might have a better. Were you in that conversation? Or I know Thorsten was. So no is the answer. You do need to have a full copy of both the consensus layer chain that we call ETH2 and the execution layer chain that we call ETH1. And so there is still maybe a little bit of debate about the actual size of the drive that you need. If you ask me, I'm going to say you need 2 terabytes. Other people may come up with slightly different standards.
Right. 2 is a conservative number. You'll be fine.
With 1 or 1.5 terabytes, you're going to end up, if you use Geth, you're going to end up having to compress that every few weeks or months.
Every 6 months or so, yeah. Not fun.
Which, it's no big deal. If you're saving money and you're still buying reputable hardware, then that may be okay. But I really do prefer and feel more comfortable with 2 terabytes.
You're also probably not running 10 to 100 validators or 1,000 in that case. If you are, just spring for the 2 terabyte.
And I'm guessing Mojo still has a bunch of questions regarding his shopping spree.
Yes. So one of the questions that I have is, I guess we've also kind of been going over it already, but what does each part do or mean for staking in one of these machines? We've already kind of gone over what an SSD can do for these. It's essentially allowing you to make a copy of the beacon chain onto your little machine here. But what did the other parts do, if you want to go over that for me? And why would they be important?
You want to talk about the 7 essential parts of a computer?
I think that was asking. He's asking, what does a CPU do? What does
RAM do?
No,
not necessarily. What I mean is, like, in terms of like staking, like what you've kind of described like what an SSD would do for staking. Yeah, like
yeah. Why do I want 16 gig of RAM? Do I want 32?
Exactly.
Do I want 64? Yeah. Should it be a terabyte of RAM?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to get towards. Yes.
Sure. So let's talk about RAM. Thorsten can fill in with the more technical details. I'm always like a higher level kind of guy, but programs like your consensus layer client and your execution layer client, for simplicity, let's call them Nimbus and Geth. They run in memory. So the computer doesn't access the hard drive every time it needs to run those. It kind of loads them in memory, and they run from memory with what's called a memory footprint. So that application is going to be allocated an amount of memory, and that's what it runs with. And so we know that in general, most consensus and execution layer combos take between 8 and 16 gigs of RAM. And so that's kind of what we want to leave them with. I don't think you really need more than 16, but you do need at least 8. And while the benefits are minimal, do you do 8?
I would not do 8 because we've done this in Rocket Pool with the RPIs, and they start pruning Geth every 1.5 months because they don't have enough RAM to keep the database from growing. So don't do 8.
So you need 16 gigs of memory. I don't think you need 32. I do run 32 just because I believe in overkill. And you'll find that with me. We all have our own little style. And my style is usually to throw more hardware at a problem than it needs. Our good friend Joe Klappis is a minimalist. He wants to run things on the absolute minimum of hardware just because it's a challenge for him. There's probably someone who's a rationalist. Nolan, are you a rationalist? Well, you have the same server I do. Yeah, so you might find someone who is like middle of the road, but in my experience, it's always better to have a little bit more than necessary, so that you don't butt your head against the same problem over and over. So you're going to need at least 16 gigs of memory. We talked about the size of the hard drive. The processor is actually very important. We haven't really addressed that yet. One of the reasons I like modern NUCs is any modern NUC you buy is going to be able to keep up with the chains. But there are some hardware or some CPU specifics, and I just kind of buy big CPUs or fast CPUs.
I would say anything 4-core and reasonably recent is fine, period. Yeah, if you want to throw 6 or 8 cores at it, go for it. You don't need it, but it won't hurt you. 32 gig of RAM can be useful. It does 2 things for you. One, you can run any combo of client you like. So if you're like, I really like Java, I want Teku and Besu, and I want to give them big cache, that's going to fit into 16 but it'll definitely fit into 32, right? The other reason is if you're like, oh, I really love Geth. Yes, I know it's a majority client, but I want to run it, but I don't like that it's growing by like 13, 14 gig a week. Give it more cache, which you can do with 32 gig, and it'll grow slower. So there's that,
And future-proofing. We have an idea what things are going to look like in a year, but none of us knows the reality of it. And so buying a little more hardware than you need is great for future-proofing. And back to CPU. Go ahead.
You can have, I'm not going to say much about that. Only that if I future-proof today and I need it in 2 years' time, I could have gotten twice that for half the price.
Yes, totally accurate. Yeah. And that's, speaking of price, we don't want to, I'm not trying to make you spend a lot of money, but don't skimp either. You should plan to fairly spend about $1,000 on this setup. Now, yes, obviously, if you want to run it on a Pi, you can get away with running the whole thing for $250 or so. But I really do encourage you, if you're a home enthusiast, if you're not trying to do really cool things, if you just want to make it work, then plan to budget about $1,000 for the setup.
And remember, we're talking, in the case for Rocket Pool, it's like $50,000 worth of Ether here, It's not, ETH isn't $300 anymore. So it makes sense to invest into a good setup versus trying to...
Where we get the ominous music when we talk about ETH going back to $300 in 2022.
I was like, wait, it's back there now. 2 months later, we're back at 300. Who knew? All right, Mojo, how are we doing?
No, it's great. I'm getting a lot better understanding. So essentially, we're trying to look at anything maybe like an i5 or better for a CPU, anywhere from 1 to 2 terabytes in SSD, and then 16 gigs plus of RAM. Pretty much would be the minimums that we would want to look for. Or if I was to go on, say, a Newegg and to put in, I want these specs on the side for my filters, I would want to select those as like, give me this and up, essentially.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds
yeah.
good.
Like you
try that
you
right now.
you can build this with a recent, like a 9th generation ROP i3. You can build it with AMD. Like some people build this with AMD laptop chips, 4500Us. Works fine.
Cool.
We can make this as complicated as it wants to be. Really, what I like to do is just find a good NUC SKU. That like a SKU is just the model name. Like this, I'm running here a BX NUC 10i 7F NH1. And if someone says that to you, you can go and buy that and have everything that we're talking about without having to mix and match parts and paste it together.
What was that one more time? Can you post that for us so that we can quickly take a look, or at least so I can quickly take a look here? I actually have Newegg open at the moment. So
let me see. This is
So while you're doing that, I think one of the questions we should directly answer is, and I think Mojo asked this in an earlier question, but we didn't address it head on. And that is, specifically, why can't I do this on my home PC? Why wouldn't I run this on our daily runner? Why do we want a separate clean system for our validator?
Good question. Yeah. Why indeed? YOLO, man.
You want to take one?
I can take this one. Like one of the main reasons you don't want to run your staking setup on your like personal machine that you use daily is like the updates. Like when you're gonna be doing updates on your personal machines, maybe you don't want to restart your staking machine as well. So I mean, I did this mistake myself. Eventually, I moved to to a dedicated hardware, and so that's one of the main reason I see not to run your staking setup on your own machine, even if you could do it, even if like you have some VM running around, and then you have plenty of RAM, plenty of CPU. It's not a good idea. You're much better running this on a dedicated machine, and the Nox and the different small factor PCs are pretty good for this.
So I'll add a few ideas. One is that the staking software is written with Linux in mind. It can run on Windows, but Windows isn't easy mode for this. It's easy mode for client, but for this, it's actually hard mode. It's harder to get this right on Windows, from getting the time sync right to making sure it actually starts when the machine starts, not when you log in, because you don't want to have a situation where, say, you're away for the weekend, power goes out briefly, comes back. If this was a Linux machine, it would just run again. If not, if it's Windows and it's not set to start on start, but it starts on login, like most things do in Windows, because it's a client machine, not a server machine, right? Or a client OS, not a server OS. You've been down for the weekend or the week, and you get the offline penalties for that. So overall, all the guides, all the tooling is created in Linux. All the stuff that automates it is in Linux, with some exceptions. I know, Remy, you have like the Windows wizard. But for the most part, this is a whole lot easier to get right and to have up and running 24/7 and stable on a Linux machine. And so it makes sense to have that be a separate machine, right? The other part is a security concern, but that security concern, I would say, is actually less with the staking machine and more with the machine you use to interact with your crypto, which is if I'm sending crypto, receiving crypto, I may not want that to be the machine where I'm also doing adult entertainment and regular email and regular browsing, because I'll get a Trojan at some point, and it'll steal my crypto. But that's less a staking worry. That's more a general, where should I do crypto worry.
We didn't verify this, but we have a very trustworthy report of a GPU miner who downloaded an Ethereum GPU mining client that explored his network and extracted his validator keys. So
wow.
That's another reason why you would not want to run more software that is necessary on your staking machine. And we have lots of instructions for hardening your staking machine so that even if there is something on your network, it's not going to be able to get in.
And one other reason why you might want to use a dedicated machine is it's more like a set and forget, right? You set up your machine, you put it somewhere, and you just forget about it mostly. Like you still have to do updates, and then you still have to prune eventually. But it's much easier to think that way, I think.
But Remy, if I forget it, how will I know when it's down? How will I know when my validator isn't earning money?
That's
That's
actually a
a
question I was
pretty
gonna
good
ask.
question, and maybe that's somewhat a little further from the hardware shopping that we've been talking about. But there's a bunch of monitoring tools that you could use. The Beacon Chain website has some pretty nice monitoring tools there. There's a bunch of graph dashboards and alerting that you can set up on your own machine. But there's a bunch of other stuff that you can set up once you're done with your main validator
Yeah, beacon
configuration.
chain is what I was aiming at, right?
Yep.
That just solves it. All right, Mr. Mojo, what other questions we got?
So there's a full disclosure. Buddha works for Beacon Chain, and we are closely aligned with them. We do hold them in high regard.
Yep.
Sure, let me take a look over them, see if there was anything that didn't get brought up yet. It doesn't seem like it. All the questions I have, I think we've gone over and more. So everything I've thought of at least has already been answered.
So what's your final bill of materials here, Mojo? What are you buying?
Bill of materials, what am I buying? Well, Superfizz's recommendation, he threw it in our Zoom chat here. I've been looking at it, and it's well within budget. I mean, honestly, I think just to keep it simple, whenever I'm just going to say, whenever I get a recommendation from Superfizz, I'm probably going to take it. Cross your fingers and take that with a grain of salt, But personally, I've been looking at the one that he's given us. I'm just like, wow, this looks like practically everything I would want and more. It's well within budget. I'm probably just going to end up going with this.
It's definitely why I pushed for him to be your intern.
Yes, because I just go with everything now.
You have good recommendations. Do you have a recommendation for the right mountain to be on for Denver and go skiing?
Yeah, where
should we be go skiing? I have not been in Denver.
There's Ridge. Yeah, wow. I think that might be good to go somewhere like, I don't know, after the 21st, maybe a little less than a week or so.
Right, and then of course I have to. Since we had the Breckenridge, there you go. Since we had the shout out to Joe earlier, I have to say, so people have been doing this on a Pi 4 with 8 GB RAM and an external Samsung T5, specifically that one, because it seems to be the only drive actually fast enough that's external. And Joe has been working on making this a little faster. So he's got this idea where you take a Pi compute module, stick an NVMe SSD into it, and then that gets rid of the external. And just now in pre-order is something called the Rock 5B, which is 16 gig of RAM. And as big an SSD as you want, it takes regular full-size NVMe SSDs. And still, the Pi software on it, still an ARM processor, still 15 watts max, I think, of draw. So for people who really love minimal, that's
for fun.
That's for fun. That's
I
right.
know there are people who run it in production seriously, but this is their kind of game.
That's right.
This isn't everyone's kind of game. So if you're just trying to save money, that's not the route you want to go.
No, it's not for saving money. It's for being able to brag that your staking machine is literally powered by a banana. That's what it's for.
Yes.
There's a caveat I wanted to mention about people buying Nox or like small factor PCs in general. If you buy the bare bone units where you have to buy the RAM separately and the disk separately, make sure you check the compatibility with the different RAM modules, and like some SSD sizes won't fit in those small boxes, right? So if you don't know about all of those stuff, maybe create a list and send it to us. We'll check it for you, make sure it fits correctly and it's all compatible.
And I'll come back to
a tall and a short version. The tall version has a spot for a 2.5-inch SSD. And the short only has a slot for the NVMe stick. Now, if you look at the specs, the hardware specs for this, it's going to say like the maximum SSD size is something like a terabyte. But we know through tons and tons of practice that we haven't observed a limit to existing SSD sizes in these devices yet.
There isn't one. I do want to, once more say, when you're choosing RAM, choose boring and reliable. You don't want, as much as I giggle about RGBs to myself, you don't want the gamer RGBs, you don't want the overclock, you don't want the XMP stuff. All you're doing is you're introducing instability into your system.
It's one of those things where you choose Corsair or something and sort by the highest rated and just go with it, because that's at least that's the way that I do it.
Yeah, sure, that works. Or people have had good success with the Samsung sticks because they're boring. They're running at the rated speed. They're not trying to go fast, and that's all you need.
One thing I would like to go ahead.
You first.
I was just going to kind of zoom out. The question I'm going to pose here is slightly outside of the shopping hardware specific question here, but I think we'll tie it in. And that is just an observance, right? So we're talking about best hardware for solo staking on Ethereum, but let's look at the range here. We're talking about Raspberry Pis. We're talking about laptop hardware, consumer grade towers to enterprise servers. How is it that Ethereum can handle that range? Isn't it something, isn't this like mining huge warehouses full of GPUs? Like how does Ethereum have this flexibility where there's range into the world of solo staking? And why would that be valuable? I'm thinking of like the NFT world on one of the digs in terms of like the sort of narrative within cryptocurrency is that this is bad for the environment. This is consuming way too much power and electricity. So maybe we can kind of touch on the spectrum here that Ethereum brings to the table in solving for that problem.
Sure, and that's actually, I've actually heard this, and I being so deep in the tech, I found it surprising at first, but you're 100% right. The person said, I'm really interested in NFTs, but I know they're bad for the environment. And so NFTs are just tokens. They're good or bad or not for the environment, depending on the underlying blockchain, right? So super, you want to take it? What is proof of stake and why does it take less energy?
Yeah, I got excited when I realized, hey, this is a setup. So when Ethereum was released in 2015, it mined with an algorithm that's specific. Well, it's not specific. It benefits from massively parallel processing, and so in the beginning that was done with CPUs, and now it's done with powerful GPUs. And so the current Ethereum chain, what we call the proof of work chain, is powered by millions of GPUs all around the world. It's one of the reasons gamers hate cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency enthusiasts buy up GPUs at outrageous prices and prevent people from using them in their gaming systems. They use a ton of electricity. When I mined Bitcoin 2011, when I mined Ethereum in the beginning, I ran my GPUs as hard and as hot as I could and closed my eyes about the power bill. Things are different now. We recognize the impact that cryptocurrency can have on the environment. And we recognize that if Ethereum is going to be a good global citizen, it has to change. It was actually part of Vitalik's original roadmap in 2014. He described it as Serenity. It's the switch to proof of stake. And rather than building blocks by entering this kind of contest with other GPUs, it's now a selection process for people who hold 32 Ether. And so the benefit of this is that we can run a much larger network and only use 1/100th of the power that we're currently using on the Ethereum proof of work chain. And it's actually less than 1/100th.
It's like 1/10,000th.
Yeah, that's an exaggeration in itself. It is infinitesimally smaller. And so this is going to allow Ethereum to be a good global citizen as we provide a valuable service. And I don't want to slander any other chain, but this kind of is in contrast to other chains who are burning energy to make money. It was how we started. It's not something that I'm proud of. It's not something that I think we should continue. The good news is Ethereum is changing to be a better global citizen. And I think in time, people will recognize that and value us for it. Off soapbox.
Yeah, so 99.5% at least reduction in energy use, right? Hopefully still this year. So if you're in the market for a gaming GPU, wait a few more months. There should be a flood of them in the market.
Well, we kind of know historically when GPU mining opportunities disappear that other GPU mining opportunities appear. And
maybe
we hope that that we're kind of setting a standard for again, good global citizenship, because the same GPUs in a gamer's box aren't burning the same kind of electricity that they're burning in a miner farm. In a mining farm, they're running at 110%, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and never stop until they die. And then you start them again and let them die again. But if they're in a gamer's box, they're only running 18 hours a day. And so that was a joke. And so it's much better for those GPUs to be in the hands of gamers than in the hands of miners.
All right, then.
So Dakota, I did it. I was not supposed to out you. That's how I know you, Mojo. Thanks for being our guinea pig. I look forward to this year, to you learning with us and kind of helping us remember the things that we didn't know or that we forgot to ask. And so I'm glad you're so sharp. I'm glad you're on this journey with us. Thanks to everyone who came today to kind of examine the big picture of hardware and figure out what it takes to build a box from scratch. We wanted to pop back in because something else important came across as we were chatting afterwards that we really do need to bring up, and that is bandwidth, your internet connection, your internet service provider. So a lot of us, some of us live in areas where bandwidth is never anything that crosses our mind. Others of us have data caps, and so watching Netflix or playing games can burn up your availability. And there are really two things to think about in terms of your network. That is, your transmission speed and your data cap. And so who can talk to me about transmission speed? Let's do transmission speed first. What's a
You don't need much.
Transmission
You
speed?
don't need
Okay.
much. 25 down, 10 up is plenty. Plenty.
Yeah, and
if you have
nothing.
broadband, you're good.
So go to speedtest.net or speedof.me, do an internet speed test. If you see at least 25 down and 10 up, you're great. It's pretty standard. If you even if you have a cell connection, you can get much better than that. In terms of,
does that matter on the volume of validators that I'm hosting in regards to that speed?
A good question. It probably does a little.
it will
I
matter
haven't
more
done that
later.
testing. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, it doesn't matter a lot.
Right.
But what we do know is that in the future, running more than one validator is likely to use more data. And it's just something to keep in mind. You may need to think about future proofing, but we're not sure exactly what that looks like at this moment.
Right.
So in terms of total bandwidth per month,
Data cap,
even though it's using a little, it's using that very consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And so how much are we talking about, Thorsten?
I have seen figures from anywhere between 2 to 4 terabyte a month. And if you just fell out of your chair, then it's time to think about not doing hardware, but doing like a cloud VPS or something. It depends a little bit on how many peers you give your clients, because this is all peer-to-peer. They all talk to each other, right? If you lower the peer number, it'll be lower. Maybe you can get away with just under 2 terabyte. But yeah, it's a shockingly high number if you're under a data cap.
Yeah, and before you jump to a cloud service provider, I would like to urge caution. I am not a fan of cloud data service providers for staking on the Beacon chain because they have a natural proclivity to concentrate the network.
Okay.
And the entire goal with a Beacon chain validator is to be up. And really, not do you want to be up, you want to be up when everyone else is down. So if you're at home and your validator goes down for an hour, it's no big deal. But if the eastern half of the United States goes down and you're down, then you really want to get up as quickly as you can, because the penalties scale with the number of validators that are down.
So what's your recommendation, Super? What does somebody do who has either bad internet or capped internet at home?
So first, it makes sense to investigate another provider option if that's available. It may be worth it. There's also bonded connections. You may be able to get two connections and bond them together. You may be able to get a different plan from your provider that gives you more bandwidth. Before you consider a VPS, I would really encourage you to maybe think about a product like Rocket Pool, where you're doing passive staking, where someone with that bandwidth and that hardware is staking, and you hold the RETH token and collect 90% of the rewards. That, in my mind, is still decentralized staking and is preferable to putting a lot of ETH in under one roof. Essentially, if you're using AWS and 80% of people
don't use AWS. It's really expensive.
Yeah, and it goes down, and you're going to say, but it never goes down. You're right. But if it goes down for 10 minutes, there's going to be a severe consequence if a lot of people are on it. And so that's just my 2 cents. I know there are even, and this makes me sad, there are Rocket Pool node operators who choose cloud instances. And I feel like that's not in the spirit of decentralization. Everything that we're doing is trying to spread the network as thinly around the world as we can and not concentrate it in these warehouses. And at the end of the day, if the best staking that you can do is on a VPS, and that's what you need to do, and you need to do that with Prism, I'm okay with that. It's okay.
I almost believed that.
It is. It's true. It's true. In the same way, I support all stakers in any way they can stake, but I want everyone to stake to the highest standard that they can to promote the health of the network. And so if you hear me trying to talk you out of Prism, if that's the thing that you have to use, it's okay. If you have to use a VPS, that's okay. I want you to stake. I just want you to stake to the highest standard for the health of the network that you can.